Welcome back, designers. In today's tutorial, we're going to be talking about C.R.A.P. Yes, you heard me right. As you know, C.R.A.P stands for the Design Principles of Contrast, Repetition, Alignment, and Proximity. Your challenge will be to take this very badly designed template file with the 4 artboards and fix the elements inside of each artboard to properly show evidence of each design principle. We're going to be starting with contrast today. So what I want to do is use my zoom tool. It looks like a magnifying glass. And I'm basically going to go and fit screen in my options bar. And maybe click on it again so that you guys can see all of the elements expanded. I might have expanded too much, so you can also hold down Alt on your keyboard if you need to zoom back out. With my very first artboard, you can see that I have a boring gray background and then 3 black rectangles. So my job here is to try to show contrast with both scale and color so I can bring attention to at least one of these rectangles. To start things off, I'm going to click to expand the arrow so I can see all of the layers that hold the elements in contrast. So each of the rectangles is selected when I go and click on the layer. And then I can also edit the color fill once I am able to double click on that adjustment. Let's start off with maybe my middle rectangle. Maybe I want this one to stand out just through the use of color. So what I might do is select it, go to my shape tool. You guys can see that right now by default I selected to ellipse, but it doesn't really matter what shape you actually have. You're still going to be able to edit the fill. Just for kicks, I'll just change it to rectangle since that's what I'm using. And then in the options bar, I can see the fill and the stroke and the width of the stroke for each shape. I'm going to start off by maybe selecting a different fill. Because each of these rectangles is dark, and maybe I want to create contrast by using a light color instead. Right away, I've done very little work. I essentially just changed the color, and already I have a pretty strong contrast because this is the one element that stands out the most just through the use of color. I also maybe want to use scale. So maybe for rectangles 3 and 1, I'm going to select them both simultaneously by holding Control on my keyboard. Maybe I just want to go and resize them. Maybe I want to make them a little bit smaller. I'm going to select one at a time so that I can make proper adjustments to the space in between. You guys will see that as I drag all of these shapes around, I have these purple lines, and they are called your smart guides, and you want to try to use them as much as possible because they help you to align each of the objects in your artboards better. So already now I have a sense of contrast through the use of both scale and color. I think just for kicks I'm going to go and try to make it a little bit more aligned. Maybe I want to show a contrast through width as well as scale. So I might make one of these rectangles longer, but skinnier. Let me see if I can make it longer by dragging on the corners. Oh, guess not. That's all right. So right now I'm contrasting several things. I'm contrasting the thickness and the color of this particular rectangle with the dull color of the ones outside of it. Now, I don't know about you guys, but I am not a neutral kind of girl. I like bright, saturated colors and pastel colors. So what I might do is actually go and change the background as well. Because I'm using a color fill layer, I can literally just go double click on it, and I can select something a little bit more interesting. Because I'm using some pastel colors here, I might want to go and maybe use a soft pastel color in the background as well. I'm using yellow, so I might want to use a complement to yellow, which, as you guys know, would be purple. I do see that the placement in the middle is a little bit problematic here, so I might want to go and bring it down so I can create a gradation here in size. Maybe make this one a little bit longer and thicker just to really push the contrast in these shapes. Now, as you guys know, I do not expect you to copy me. Far from it. I do expect you guys, however, to do your own designs inspired by what I'm showing you. Now, I want to use slightly more interesting colors than just black and white. So for kicks, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to go and change all of the black to another purple. And this way, I have edited this substantially. So now I have evidence of contrast through the use of color, through the use of size, through placement as well, because if you have these two rectangles on the top, this one is going to stand out even more just because it's positioned lower. Likewise, I could go and put it at the very top, and then through the use of the placement, obviously the yellow would stand out even more. But now I'm ready to move on to my very next artboard, which is going to be a repetition. So I'm going to click on the arrow to collapse all of the layers for contrast, and I'm going to move along and work on repetition. Of the 4 design principles we're talking about, repetition might be the easiest for you guys to understand because, like the name implies, you're basically repeating some element in your design to create a pattern or to create some kind of visual rhythm. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this triangle shape in my artboard and I'm going to repeat it to create an interesting pattern with it. To start off, I might want to go and place it at the top, and then I'm going to duplicate it to create a pattern. You can use Ctrl-J like jack-o'-lantern to make a duplicate. I'm using a Mac, so I'm using Command-J. And I'm going to use my Move tool, my very first tool on the toolbar, to drag it over. I want to try to keep it as aligned as possible, so I'm using my smart guides to help me with that. I'm going to use another duplicate, so I'm basically going to go and hit Command-J multiple times, or Control-J if you are on a PC, so that I can duplicate my shape. Now already I have repetition and I haven't really done much, but it's a little boring, and also the placement is problematic because it's off-center. So you can actually use Control to select each of your layers simultaneously, like I'm doing here with all these triangle copies, and center it. Now you don't always want to center every single element. However, it may be useful to you to do so this one time around. So to continue my pattern, I'm actually going to go with all of these layers selected and hold down Control and just hit Control-J. And I'm going to have yet another duplicate. Now I actually want to create a pattern that kind of looks like teeth. I guess I have Halloween vibes in my head. And what I'll do is go to Edit, Transform, and Flip Vertical so that I can get kind of like a smile is the idea that I'm going with right now. I'm going to actually go one more time and hold down Control to select each of these layers. Again, so I can work on the placement of this pattern in progress and just kind of center it a little bit more. Beautiful. So now I have repetition. I created a very distinct visual pattern. You could essentially fill the entire artboard with triangles to create a slightly busier pattern. But for right now, as far as I'm concerned, I have evidence of the principle, so I'm happy. The only thing I'm not satisfied with is this ugly black background. So one more time, I'm going to double click on that color fill layer, and I'm just going to select a slightly more harmonious color. Because I was using a lot of light pastels, I might want to go and maybe use a pale green. I can also see that each of these triangles has a thin black stroke around it. If that is fine with you, then you can leave it. For me, I think I want to work with something a little different. Just so that I don't have to do each one at a time, I'm going to go and hold down Command and click on each of these triangles. Go to my shape tool, and over here I can see that the stroke is set to black with a 1 pixel size. I can click on the little swatch for stroke, and just like I was doing for fill, I can change the color of it. So I'm going to maybe change it to a slightly darker green and maybe make the stroke a little bit thicker. So maybe I'm going to set it to 10 pixels. Again, you guys are not going to copy me exactly. You guys are going to edit your own template accordingly to, according to your own taste levels. But I think that looks a lot more interesting, and I really love how graphic and simple it is. So I am going to collapse each of these layers and move on to my very next artboard for the principle of alignment. So the principle of alignment says that each of the elements in your design, whether you're working with images or text or shapes like I'm doing here, needs to be very symmetrical, needs to be properly organized, needs to follow an order of importance that makes it easier for the viewers to follow. So I'm going to imagine, for example, that I am working on a layout for a magazine article. Let's say this square right over here in my alignment panel is going to be the picture of the person I'm profiling in the article. And all of these lines right over here are actually going to stand in for text. All I'm doing, by the way, is just selecting each of these layers and rotating them. So what I want to make sure is that each of these elements align. So you'll notice that right now the line and the square don't really have any relationship together, but if I go and use my smart guides like I'm doing right here to properly align them, I'm seeing some order and some symmetry. Let's say that I have a profile on, 3 singers in this fictional article. So I need 3 rectangles to stand in for the pictures of those singers. Just like I did earlier, I'm just going to hit Command J or Control J on a PC so that I can go and properly duplicate each of these rectangles. So if I'm doing a profile on 3 singers, then I need 3 squares. Now, right now, this is not properly aligned. You guys can see it's off center. There's quite a lot of negative space right here between the edge of the artboard and the rectangle. And then it's completely cut off here. So that's a huge problem. To properly align it, I'm going to select each of these squares and I'm going to basically go and center them. They look a little bit big, so I'm just going to go and actually resize them just so it doesn't look like I'm running out of space. And again, I'm using those smart guides. Those are the purple lines that you guys see across my artboard to work on placement to properly center each of these elements. These lines right here are basically going to stand in as text. I'm not actually going to be writing anything right now in my artboard because we're not really ready to tackle typography on Photoshop yet. But this is basically going to be like my stand-in for text. So that's where the article text would be. You guys can see it doesn't properly align. You guys can see the line is slightly bigger. So I'm just resizing it slightly, again, to try to make it as perfectly aligned with the rectangles as possible. Now, there is some lack of balance because the top part of my artboard is very busy with each of these shapes in the line. So just like I was doing before, I'm going to hit Command J or Control J on a Mac, and I'm just going to move down my copy like so. And then maybe just for kicks to make it easier on me, I'm going to select both of those layers, hit Command J. Let me just select 2 at a time. Hit Command J or Control J on the Mac. It's very confusing when you're using 2 different operating systems, let me tell you. And I'm basically just going to go and move those down. And again, I want this to stand in for text, right? So I'm going to make it pretty lengthy. Once again, you're not expected to copy me. You are expected to work on your own alignment. So don't make it exactly like I did. Try to look up some examples online, perhaps. so that you guys can work on your own examples using the same principles of design. Now it is slightly off in the alignment. You guys can see that it's like shifting a little bit to the right, and if you're like me, that annoys you, so I'm going to use a guide to help me out. Right now my rulers are not visible, so I'm going to go to view at the top and select rulers, and then you guys are going to see these rulers all around your document. Right now it looks like they're set to pixels perhaps, so I'm going to double click. Yes, they were set to pixels. I'm going to change them to inches just so it's slightly more recognizable for me to deal with, and I'm going to click on the left ruler and align it right here to these rectangles so that when I select each of those lines, I can just go and shift them so that they are properly aligned with the guide. Now, this might seem a little excessive for some of you, but if you're a type A person like I am, it's really important, or you're basically going to be staring at all the mistakes for forever. So now I can see some slight irregularities, so I'm just going to work diligently on fixing them. Wow, that is so much better. It is so much better aligned. If you don't need the guide anymore, you can go to the View menu again, select Guides again, and this time you're going to select Clear Guides, and that line is not going to bother you anymore. So I want this to stand in for a fictional article. So what I think I'll do is I'm going to fill each and every one of these shapes with a picture. I had previously said, well, this will be an article profiling 3 musicians. So just for kicks, I'm going to download 3 pictures of people off pexels.com that I can use to fill each and every one of these shapes. Okay, so I downloaded some images off pexels.com of different individuals, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to basically use these rectangles to place each of the images in. To open the image, I'm going to use Control O, and my images are going to be in my downloads folder. And let's say I want to start off with the image of this woman who's veiled. I am going to use Control A to select the entire image, then Control C to copy the image, so that when I go back to my template, I'm going to hit Control V like Victor to place the woman in. Now you guys can see that the image is really, really big. So I'm going to use Control T to resize it, make it a little bit smaller. You guys can hold down Enter to save your changes. And now I'm actually going to use something called a clipping mask so I can insert this image neatly inside of the square. So I'm going to place it kind of like on top of that square. You guys can see in my layers panel, I'm going to call this one Veiled Woman. This image of the veiled woman is right on top of the rectangle, so I can right click on it and select the option that says Create Clipping Mask. And you guys will see that now the woman is placed neatly inside of. I'm going to do the exact same thing for the other images. So I no longer need this woman's picture, so I'm going to open a different one. So Control O. Next, I'm going to use this image of this young guy. Control A to select the image. Control C to copy it. Flip over to my template. Control V like Victor to paste it in, and the image is huge, so I'm going to resize it using Control T. Drag on the corners, almost there. I'm going to place it on top of the rectangle again. I'm going to call this layer Smiling Guy, and then I'm going to right click on the Smiling Guy layer, select Create Clipping Mask, and you'll notice that he's perfectly positioned inside of that rectangle. So I'm going to do the same thing for my last rectangle. And I'm going to open my last image using the exact same steps as before. Having positioned the picture correctly, I'm going to call this one Smiling Woman. I'm going to right click on that layer, and I'm going to select Create Clipping Mask again to properly position her in. So now it's looking a lot more like an article that I would see in a magazine. Just for kicks, I'm just going to go and actually edit the rectangles to add a uniform stroke around them. So I'm going to Control click each of these rectangles again And just like I was doing before when I was working on repetition, I'm going to click where it says stroke, and I'm going to maybe increase the size of that stroke to about 5 pixels, just so that it looks a little bit more uniform, as you guys can see here. And then for each of these lines, I'm going to leave them as is, but I do want to change the actual background color because gray is just not working for me. So I'm going to double click on that color fill layer. And what I could do is just select a random color from my color picker, but if I actually go and drag my mouse over the images, you guys will see that it kind of starts to sample several of the colors in the image itself. So if I go and drag over this woman's tan skin, you guys will see that it starts kind of sampling a lot of the colors in her skin already. If I go and drag over this woman's lighter skin, you guys can see that it starts kind of mimicking several of the colors seen in the image. So I think I like this peachy color. I'm going to click OK to save my changes. All right, everyone, I'm going to call this artboard complete. So I have alignment in the 3 shapes where I inserted each of these pictures, and alignment in each of the lines that I put underneath it to, again, substitute as text like you guys would see in a magazine article. This particular artboard probably has more layers than any of your artboards will. So I'm going to click on the little arrow to collapse it and move on to my next artboard for the principle of proximity. To demonstrate the principle of proximity, you essentially want to take a bunch of elements that are scattered throughout a design and bring them physically together, closer together, so that you can form a relationship between them. So if we look at our artboard for proximity, you guys will see that I have several circles that are kind of scattered throughout the artboard with no rhyme or reason. So in this case, all I want to do is essentially bring each of these circles closer so that I can start forming a relationship between them and show that they are connected. What I'm going to do is going to expand my artboard for proximity and start selecting one circle at a time. I think what I'll do is maybe form another pattern. So I'm just using a horizontal guide here, just kind of eyeballing it, just so that I can place each of the circles on that guide. You guys will see that as I click on each of these circles, or ellipses, ellipse is basically a fancy way of saying circle, they are kind of surrounded by this blue box to show me that they're selected. So right away, just by moving these 3 circles together, I'm using the principle of proximity. So again, bring them physically closer together so you can form some kind of relationship between each of these circles. We can see that they're somehow connected. So now I just missed these. I missed these last 2, so I'm going to go and move them maybe right over here in between to again form an interesting pattern. You guys can try overlapping them. You guys can try putting them in a row or putting them in a column or something, or whatever you feel might be more interesting. I think I want them to just kind of touch that guide. So I'm going to move them up and align them. You guys will see that I refer to these terms very often. And now, as I did before, I'm just going to get rid of that guide real quick. I'm going to select each of these circles by holding down Control on my keyboard and clicking on them. And I'm just going to go and center them and use my smart guides to figure out what is the best placement for each of these. So this was an easy fix. To bring each of these together, you are now demonstrating the element of, this was an easy fix. To show the principle of proximity, all you had to do was bring each of these scattered elements together. Just for kicks, I'm going to go now and start playing around with color because you guys know I just don't like the black and white look. So I'm going to double click on my color fill layer and start messing around with slightly more harmonious color combinations. I really like that pink. Then I'm going to go and maybe select each of these ellipses, holding down Control and clicking them. Then use my shape tool. Right now it's set to rectangle. If I right click, I can select ellipse. And up here in the options bar, I can start playing around with different colors that I can add to each of these ellipses. I think I really like the yellow look. I'm just not liking the stroke. So I might go and maybe use a different stroke color and increase the stroke to make it a little bit more visible, maybe by about 5 pixels. I might also, while I'm at it, increase the size to make the circles a little bit more prominent. And that, my friends, is how we show proximity. So that one was pretty easy. I feel like out of the 4 design principles that we went over, proximity and repetition were slightly easier to understand. So let's take a look. I'm going to zoom out so that you guys can see the work that I've done on each of the artboards. So starting with my artboard for contrast, I took those 3 scattered rectangles and I created contrast through the use of complementary colors, through the use of a bright color against a slightly darker color, and through the use of scale and size, making one shape larger than the other, so that's where your eyes naturally gravitate. For my artboard for repetition, I took the one lone triangle and repeated it to create a pattern and thus showed the evidence of repetition in my artboard. For alignment, I started creating a fictional layout for a fictional article, and I was thinking about using each of these rectangles as a frame for pictures of people, and then used each of these lines that I duplicated to stand in for text. Each of the elements is very symmetrical and placed neatly within the artboard to show proper alignment. And lastly, for proximity, I just took those scattered circles and brought them closer together, then used a harmonious color scheme to finish it off. So looking at my artboards, you can see that there is a very clear improvement over what we started with. Now that I'm done editing each of the artboards in this template, I'm ready to export my final draft. I want each of these artboards to appear as pages in a PDF document. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to hold down Control in my keyboard and click in each of the artboards. They should all be highlighted in a gray color like you guys can see here in my layers panel. Then I'm going to go up to the File menu at the top of my workspace, and I'm going to select Export and Artboards to PDF. I'm going to select my flash drive as my destination. If you don't have your flash drive plugged in, select Desktop temporarily, and you guys are going to go and change the template name. So I'm going to call this one Finished C.R.A.P Design, whatever helps you to identify the actual file. You guys got to make sure that where it says options, it says multi-page document. That's very important. And you guys are going to click run. Then you will see that Photoshop is going to go through each of the templates one by one to go and convert them to pages in a PDF. It says that my PDF was successful, so I'm now going to go and verify it. So this is my PDF document. I can see that artboards 1 through 4 were properly added as pages in this PDF. This is what you guys are going to submit to me on Schoology. Hope you guys have enjoyed the video and you guys have learned all about these very important principles of design. Hit me up if you have any questions in the comments area below, and I cannot wait to see your own interpretations of this assignment. Peace out.